They took an oath to protect the nation. They swore allegiance to the flag. Yet today, they sit behind heavy bars, condemned by the very country they vowed to serve. These are the soldiers whose crimes shook the U.S. military to its core, and whose fates remain frozen in a long, tense waiting game. Welcome to a journey inside America's secretive military death row, where justice has been delayed but never forgotten. For decades, no American soldier has been executed. Some call it mercy, others call it a mistake. But when you hear the chilling truths behind these four men's stories, you might wonder, how long should justice wait? Timothy Hennis, the family dog, and the triple murder. It was supposed to be a simple, heartwarming goodbye. May 1985, Fayetteville, North Carolina. Air Force Captain Gary Eastburn and his wife Catherine were preparing to relocate their family overseas. Part of that process included finding a new home for their beloved English setter Dixie. So they placed a small ad in the local classifieds, hoping to meet a kind soul who would adopt her. Enter Timothy Hennis, a polite 27-year-old Army sergeant stationed at nearby Fort Bragg. On May 7th, he arrived at the Eastburn home, shook Catherine's hand, thanked her for the dog, and drove away into the night. A simple transaction, or so it seemed. Just a few days later, neighbors grew concerned. Newspapers piled on the Eastburn's porch. A faint, desperate cry of a baby leaked through the house's walls. When police finally entered on May 12th, they found a scene that would haunt investigators for life. Catherine Eastburn had been viciously assaulted and stabbed dozens of times. Two of her daughters, 5-year-old Kara and 3-year-old Erin, were murdered in their beds. Miraculously, 22-month-old Jana survived, starving but alive. Clues pointed to a single perpetrator. A neighbor remembered seeing a tall man in a members-only jacket near the home. Fingerprints, stray hairs. The missing dog, now living with one Timothy Hennis, tied the horror together. Hennis faced trial in 1986. Prosecutors hammered the narrative, motive, opportunity, overwhelming circumstantial evidence. Neighbors picked Hennis out of photo lineups. The jury didn't hesitate. Death sentence delivered. Yet the story didn't end there. On appeal, defense lawyers argued bias and procedural errors. In 1989, Timothy Hennis walked free after a retrial. Acquitted, reintegrated, and eventually back in uniform, climbing to staff sergeant. A symbol, some thought, of the justice system correcting itself. But ghosts never stay buried. In 2006, DNA technology cracked open the case again. Evidence collected from Catherine's body, reanalyzed with modern methods, pointed unmistakably to Timothy Hennis. Civilian law said he couldn't be retried, but military law had other ideas. Hennis was recalled to active duty, court-martialed, found guilty, sentenced, once again, to death in 2010. Today, he spends each endless day at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, awaiting a punishment delayed by appeals, paperwork, and fate itself. But if Hennis's crime felt horrifying on a personal scale, the next case would betray comrades on a battlefield itself. Hassan Akbar, the soldier who turned his rifle on brothers. March 23, 2003, Camp Pennsylvania, Kuwait. The first stages of Operation Iraqi Freedom were underway. Soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division prepared nervously for battle. Amid the ranks stood Sergeant Hassan Akbar, a man whose resentment had festered for months, unnoticed or ignored. While his fellow soldiers slept under canvas tents, Akbar acted. First, he cut the power, plunging the camp into darkness. Then, in the dead silence, grenades exploded inside the sleeping quarters, followed by a hailstorm of bullets. By dawn, 2 officers were dead, Army Captain Christopher Seifert and Air Force Major Gregory Stone. 14 others were critically wounded. Akbar's rampage had lasted minutes, but its impact would scar a generation. Investigators found damning evidence in Akbar's personal diary. Weeks before the attack, he had written of his rage against leadership, his plans for violence. "My life will not be complete unless America is destroyed," one chilling line read. Akbar's defense team argued mental instability, paranoia, and stress fractures brought on by impending combat. They cited sleep deprivation, discrimination, alienation. But jurors saw cold calculation, not psychosis. In 2005, he was sentenced to death. His appeals wound slowly through the military court system, but by 2016, every door had slammed shut. Akbar, like Hennis, remains on death row, his fate in limbo, awaiting the president's pen stroke that could seal his story forever. Yet Akbar's massacre, shocking as it was, paled compared to the methodical evil that Ronald Gray unleashed. Ronald Gray, the predator. Within the army, Ronald Adrian Gray seemed like any other private when he arrived at Fort Bragg in the mid-1880s. Quiet, unremarkable, hidden. In reality, Gray was a wolf moving through a flock. Between April 1986 and January 1987, Gray kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered multiple women across civilian and military communities. Students, cab drivers, fellow soldiers, none were safe. One victim, Private Laura Lee Vickery Clay, disappeared after last being seen with a man fitting Gray's description. Her body was found later, shot multiple times, hidden in the woods. Another victim, Kimberly Ruggles, a cab driver, was discovered brutally stabbed after a call sent her to Gray's barracks. Forensic evidence piled up, fingerprints inside the cab, a stolen pistol traced back to him. Survivors pointed directly at Gray. Even his own DNA betrayed him. Convicted in civilian court first, Gray received 8 life sentences. Yet the military wasn't finished. A second court-martial convicted him on 14 charges, including multiple premeditated murders. In 1988, Gray was sentenced to death, the first soldier to face execution in decades. In 2008, President George W. Bush signed the military death warrant, reaffirming the Army's ultimate judgment. Yet procedural appeals, international scrutiny, and evolving standards of evidence have stalled the sentence. For 36 years, Ronald Gray has lingered on death row, a grim testament to how long justice can drag its feet, even for monsters hiding in uniform. And then came the man who turned a place of healing into a battlefield. Nidal Hasan, the psychiatrist who waged war on his own Fort Hood, Texas, November 5, 2009. The Soldier Readiness Center was buzzing with activity. Men and women shuffled paperwork, braced for deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. Among them moved Major Nidal Malik Hassan, a U.S. Army psychiatrist whose duty was to heal, to guide soldiers through the mental toll of war. Instead, he unleashed hell. Armed with 2 handguns, Hassan opened fire, shouting extremist slogans as he moved methodically through the room. When the smoke cleared, 13 people were dead, 30 others wounded. Investigators soon unearthed email communications between Hassan and known extremist figures. Warning signs, missed, ignored, dismissed, revealed a man radicalizing under the Army's nose. Fellow officers had expressed concern about his mental state and inflammatory remarks, but bureaucratic fears of appearing discriminatory allowed the danger to fester. Hassan's trial was a spectacle. He refused counsel, grew a beard in defiance of military regulations, showed no remorse, claimed allegiance to ideological causes rather than the Constitution he had sworn to uphold. In 2013, Hassan was convicted on all counts and sentenced to death. Confined to a wheelchair from gunshot wounds suffered during his capture, he awaits execution at Fort Leavenworth. But despite these convictions, an unsettling question lingers. Why haven't any of these death sentences been carried out? Why the execution stall? A broken road to justice military. Death sentences in the United States are like slow-moving glaciers. Automatic appeals, mandatory reviews, and presidential approval are just the beginning. Public opinion plays a heavy hand. Capital punishment has grown increasingly controversial in American society. Presidents, wary of political fallout, often avoid approving executions, especially involving former service members. Advances in DNA science create new appeal grounds, as evidence from decades ago is re-examined under stricter standards. Then there's America's global image. As one of the few Western democracies still practicing the death penalty, the US faces constant scrutiny. Executing soldiers would only magnify that criticism. Legal complexities, shifting values, political hesitation, all combine to create a system where condemned soldiers wait, not for days, but for decades. Life inside the walls, military death row. Fort Leavenworth's death row isn't a movie cliché. It's a cold, clinical reality. Inmates live in near total isolation, solitary cells, monitored communications, limited contact even with guards. Visits are rare, heavily supervised. Phone calls, if allowed at all, are short and strictly monitored. Letters pass through heavy screening before they ever reach an inmate's hand. Medical care persists. Grim necessity. Soldiers like Hassan require constant treatment, delivered under tight security. Each man faces endless legal battles, studying case law, filing motions, hunting for loopholes that might delay or derail their sentence just a little longer. For them, death doesn't arrive swiftly. It lurks outside the steel doors, a distant thunder that grows closer but never arrives. Once these men stood for the nation, wore its colors, saluted its flag. Now they are cautionary tales, a reminder that evil can grow even within the ranks sworn to protect us. They betrayed every oath they ever made, and yet, even after all this time, justice hesitates. Maybe someday soon, the final chapter will be written. Or maybe, like faded uniforms and forgotten medals, their stories will simply rot away, locked forever behind heavy bars. What do you think? Should these executions finally be carried out? Should justice, so long delayed, finally be done? Let us know your thoughts below.